Okay, hi there, everybody. I want to talk about um, training from a different perspective. Um, Now, when I was training myself back in the day, early 2000s, late 90s, I had loads of different coaches, but probably one of the most influential contributors to my coaching was an athlete called Amir Williamson and his brother Alistair, or Amir Tawani, as they were back then, and Alistair Tawani, but I think they changed it mid 2000s, 2003, 2002, maybe. Not sure. Anyway, phenomenal athletes, very inspirational. Both hammer throwers, both international hammer throwers. Amir, notably, went to Commonwealth Games in 2014. That was a pleasure to watch and to be invited to go and see him. And he went to the World Juniors as well, did incredibly well. And I remember him qualifying for the World Juniors at Crystal Palace. And I think he needed 68.50 to qualify, and he threw 68.97. And yeah, I'll always remember it. Yeah, really nice guy. And so, as silly kids, we'd watch tons of things like Bruce Lee movies. We'd watch Arnold Schwarzenegger stuff. We'd be constantly quoting kindergarten carpool, that kind of stuff. One of the videos that actually got our attention was a training video of Werner Gunthor. Werner Gunthor. I've always said Werner Gunthor, but could be Gunthor. And so, to put this in perspective, back then, here is the list. Here is the all-time list, if you can see, for shot put. And as you can see, 2023, 2022, 1990, 1988, 87, 1977. Here he is, Werner Gunthor. He's sitting at 8th place currently. Well, the 2019 wasn't there, the 2022 and the 2023 wasn't there. So he was top 5 in the world all time when we saw this video. And he wasn't necessarily the world record holder. There's Ulf Timmerman. And where is he? Alessandro Andre as well was the world record holder for a little bit. And before the dominance of the Americans, so Randy Barnes, Joe Kovacs, and Ryan Krauser, it was very much an Eastern European thing. And in recent years, Tom Walsh, the big New Zealand guy. But Brian Oldfield, that training video, we can watch at another time. But it's more of a montage. That's more of a personality. I think Werner Gunthor, the video I'm about to show you, shows you how you'd build an athlete. And for me, Brian Oldfield, that montage, that's more of a competitor. Really interesting seeing how he interacts with various different athletes. So the point of today's video is just to look at what literally a 3-time world champion, 8th on the all-time list in the world, athlete looks like. Now, I use the term athlete, not shot putter, even though he is a shot putter. You'll see by how he moves, he really was the complete package. And what I found really interesting, actually, I've got a few tabs up here. So Werner Gunthor, I mean, he was an absolute specimen. There's no doubt. Don't think this is him. This is some random training. But here he is. This is a still taken from the video. He was just a very lean man. And this is the video that we're going to be having a look at in a second. But what's rather interesting is actually a case study. Now, this is him now, or more recently. And he actually went through a phase of what's called detraining. So he actually took a while to let his body calm down from athletics. He didn't just stop. He slowly weaned himself off. It's actually quite interesting. And that's kind of hinted at this medical study here. So you can Google it if you type Werner Gunthor and twin, because this study actually talks about type 1 and type 2 muscle fibers. And it's kind of a bit of evidence of the whole nurture versus nature thing. And so what do we mean? Well, there's a lot of words in there, but I'll try and dumb it down to make it really understandable. Type 1 muscle fibers, the ones typically used for, well, there's the slow twitch, the long distance, low intensity, but last a while. They're usually a dark reddish in color because of the oxygenation, oxygen transfer going on. It's generally longer durations, lower intensity, whereas type 2 muscle fibers are the fast twitch ones. You see these in chickens a lot. Essentially, they're the real fast twitch, not a lot of stamina. They don't last very long, but they're the reason why you have them in chickens is because they're flightless birds, and they just flap around for a second, and then they just run out puff, if you like, the stamina. But they're incredibly high intensity muscle fibers, and if you're wanting to train shot putters, field event athletes, explosivity stuff, sprinters, type 2 muscle fibers are kind of thing. And so it talks about here shot putter 1 and shot putter 2, and then the untrained brother of shot putter 1. And I'll leave a link in the description of this video, or you can just Google it yourself. But shot putter 1 was Werner Gunthor, and famously he's got a twin brother. And Werner Gunthor trained for shot put under the watchful eye of Jean-Pierre Egger, who also was a shot put discus thrower, went to the Olympics himself. And so you've got this holy trifecta of, if you read it, you've got Jean-Pierre Egger, the coach, looking after this guy. And if you read further on, here you go. It says the large difference between type 1 and type 2 fiber size, even in the untrained state in both shot putter 1 and his brother, is not usually seen in humans and may be a genetic characteristic. So what that's trying to say is that naturally, or genetics, him and his brother had an largely high amount of type 2 muscle fibers, which would lend itself to explosive events. So genetically, he and his brother were more predisposed to doing explosive events. But what was interesting is that then I went on to say, we suggest the ability to selectively increase the relative area of his type 2, cross-sectional area, of his type 2 fibers in the 15 years of strength training was a key element in his success to shot putting. So they took essentially a load of muscle fibers from his vastus lateralis, which is like the big outside muscle of the thigh, the quadricep, and they took it from him at his peak, his brother, and another shot putter. Shock-a-doodle-doo, they found massive amounts of type 2 muscle twitch fibers in the shot putters, and like a 40-60%, like a relatively normal amount in the untrained brother. And then after 3 years of active detraining, type 2 fibers of shot putter 1 had reduced in size, values closer to his brother. So Werner Gunthor had actually trained for 3 years doing detraining, active detraining, so lowering the intensity, slowly weaning himself off of, like, if you like, the high intensity stuff that you're about to see in a second. And after those 3 years, his muscles had reverted to essentially the same kind of cross-sectional area, the size, as his untrained brother. So to me, this is one set of evidence of, if you want to be one of the best of all time, there's a couple of things you need. One, you need good genetics. It's not the most important thing, but it helps. Two, the right training. And three, a good technical coach to help you all the way. The last two, I'd say, they directly affect each other. I mean, the right coach will then give you the training session and the structure so that the right muscle twitch fibers happen, and neural pathways and the recruitment and all that stuff, essentially technique and power and development and all that stuff. Whether the article actually differentiates between whether it was purely genetics or just training, it seems to be here that it says was a key element, not the key element. So I guess for now, the whole nurture versus nature question is a bit unanswered, but we'll leave it as that. So Werner Gunthor, bit of background: 6'6", 6'7", and his weight ranged from apparently 120 kilos to 140 kilograms, depending on the season. Absolute tank. You'll see some of the training he did. He still holds the Swiss national record. Won European Championships, World Championships. Unfortunately, never won an Olympics. I think the highest he ever came was a bronze. If I just have a cheeky look at Werner Gunthor and his stats. So yeah, 3 times world champion, 1 times world indoor champion, 2 times Olympic game bronze medalist, and 1 times world indoor silver medalist. So yeah, if I go to results, maybe. Honours, maybe. Yeah, so shot put. So Olympic Games, 3rd, and 5th. So not bad. 84, 88, and 92. That's pretty good going. 3 Olympics. You know, say what you want. That's bloody good going. And these are all impressive marks: 2091, 2199, 2028. It seems to have done a lot better in the World Champs with 2197, 2167, and 2223. That's good. I know Ryan Krauser is actually smashing it at the moment, but you are in a very elite circle if you've ever thrown 22 meters in a shot. So, I want to talk about Werner Gunthor and his training. So hopefully this works. For the record, my German and my French is actually terrible. I have done some pre-translated notes here when I listen to it. I will be pausing it. I will be giving my thoughts and opinions. There's some parts of this I really admire and agree with. There's some parts you have to take with a pinch of salt. The reason why I say that is because, well, yeah, late 70s, early 80s going into 90s, wasn't exactly known for not having drugs. I mean, there was, you could argue there still is a drug problem in athletics. I don't think it's talked about so much now. I think doping agencies are more on it and the rest of it. But unfortunately, that's just the nature of the beast. There's always going to be new designer drugs that beat systems and all the rest of it. And it's always a drug race, not race war. It's a drugs race, weapons war, drugs war, race war, whatever. The point is that there's always this race between, you know, the ability of the dopers to find these drugs and drugs becoming better and better, masking themselves and all the rest of it. But unfortunately, you know, there's the Eastern Europeans doping in the 70s. There's the 80s stuff. There's the sprinters in the late 80s, early 90s. There's a whole host of drug-taking sprinters. I can't remember what the Olympic final was for the 100, which was deemed the dirtiest race in history. I can't remember if that was 88 or 92. But yeah, quite a lot of people were found taking drugs then. So he was a beast, this guy. Don't think he was ever done for drugs. I could be wrong. I don't want to think he's done for drugs. Because I'll be honest with you, if you think of a shot putter, you think of a very, I don't know, heavy set person, like muscly, but just heavy set. This Werner Gunthor, he doesn't look like he's on drugs. He just looks like a very highly trained athlete. It's just impressive. Like to me, if I was to train a thrower, it'd be exactly like this. And the way I train my decathletes is very similar, but I'd obviously put less emphasis on upper body development, more lower body, and it'd be more jumping and sprinting. But it'd be very similar themes that we're about to see. So apologies for my poor translation. My translation notes will be down in the description if you want them with timestamps. I'll try and just describe as we're going along. Right, so Werner Gunthor training video for shot put. Right, first off the bat, Eidengenoss Sportschule Magglingen, that's the Swiss Federal School of Sports, or the Sports Federation in Switzerland. So this is like a national training video, I'm guessing. And so we're probably going to start off with like a fairly large montage of stuff. Really spooky video, rocking the 80s mullet. I'd just like to point out, actually, if you look at the top 10, if I go back, Ryan Krauser, Joe Kovacs, Randy Barnes, and Tom Walsh, they're all rotational throwers, I believe. It's only Ulf Timmerman, Alessandro Andre, and Werner Gunthor that are gliding. I could be chatting rubbish, and I want to say Randy Barnes was one of the first rotators. Might have started off gliding and then went to rotating. I'm not sure. But generally speaking, I think it's now considered that high-end shot putters use rotation. So I think when you look at it, Werner Gunthor may have been maybe 8th all time, but I'm pretty sure you could make a case that he's the 3rd best athlete that's ever used a glide. Which is very interesting, because I look at some of his stuff and I immediately think, oh, that's not particularly good. But anyway, I digress. I think the way he gets away with it is he's just such a phenomenally well-trained athlete. And here you are, juggling 726 kilogram balls like they're beanbags. If you ever picked up one shot put that's 726 kilos, you'll realize just how hard juggling that is. I think the only more impressive feat I've ever seen with 726s like that is Brian Oldfield doing a one-step jump and slam dunking a shot put, which is just insane. I mean, most people can't even dunk anything, so trying to jump to a basketball. Das Erbe einer Karriere. Yeah, that's consequences for a training routine, the legacy of a career. So das Erbe einer Karriere, so that's the legacy of a career, and Konsequenzen für den Trainingsalltag is consequences of the training routine, or the training routine's consequences. So yeah, you've got a mountain. Okay, the path to the top is symbolically represented by a pyramid. Starting from a general, okay, so allgemeine Vorbereitungsperiode is general preparation period. Wettkampfspezifisch is a competition-specific training period. And yeah, it's transitioning into a competition. So really point blank, they have like a general preparation period, and they build up to a competition specific period. And they're what they're essentially saying is this is going to lead to success. Very interestingly, we talked about this before with the Bondarchuk's exercise classification hierarchy. But the coach, Jean-Pierre Egger, has actually taken this one step further and not just said it's exercises, it's actually the whole training structure. And so they're doing it in a very block type way, rather than having a hybrid mixed where it would be a little bit GPE, a little bit SPE, specific development, competitive exercise, and so on. You kind of flick between them. what this video is going to be talking about is they just have an entire block. So the general preparation period is divided into two phases, zwei, extensive and intensive phase. So the general preparation period is split into extensive and intensive. And we're going to refer to the competition preparation as explosive. So extensive, intensive, and explosive. So they've dumbed it down really into three levels. So they're kind of just very basically doing all of one hierarchy at a time. For combined events, I think the difference would be is you'd kind of do it in stages, and you'd implement progression in a varied way rather than just in a block stage like this. But I think that's more to do with the skill element acquisition, and I think it's more that, well, you'll see towards the end when they're in the explosive phase, that's almost entirely very small reps, high explosivity, and almost all technique. And so I think they're working on the basis of it's just one event. He's pretty Werner's already technically good at it. It just needs some tidy up ready for competitions. And I think it's more physical conditioning, and they're putting such a massive emphasis on, essentially building the athlete. Okay, so they're dividing the three phases into approximately 1 month mesocycles, depending on the goal. And those in turn are consisting of 3 or 4 week mesocycles, microcycles. Okay, so the training cycle can be initiated either through increasing, which is called progressive, or decreasing, which is called regressive. So you can see how the extensive increases and then suddenly drops off, whereas the intensive and explosive is regressive. It's decreasing as we're going along. So that'd be regressing loading. And so the final microcycle of each one that's flashing, that's serving as active recovery. So between each mesocycle, as you can see each of the blocks there, there's always going to be an active recovery week at the end before they move on, which I find really interesting. So this idea of waves, it's not just hard ramping up. It's this idea of building up to a peak and slowly coming down. So you've actually got active recovery weeks. So the performance tests conducted during this week contribute to more efficient training control. So yeah, they essentially use it as a training, as like a testing. Where are they at the end of the microcycle, of the mesocycle, sorry. So the microcycles each week, and the 3 or 4 microcycles form a mesocycle. So each of those bars is essentially a week, and that's the intensity as it's going on. I find this really impressive. Okay, so what they're essentially saying is this, starting with the extensive phase, it's all about technical foundation training. So they're talking about the initial focus is on developing structure. So and that forms the various components of the program. So the structure they talk about this idea of like a sovereign body, or like a holy body, and so balance is one of the key things, and moving with a smooth, consistent flow, even on narrow support surfaces. So before they even begin any kind of technical stuff, all of these very simple movements have to be done with a sense of balance. So by repeatedly imitating backward hopping, the ability to maintain balance is stabilized by the bilateral kite support. And so deliberate utilization of core muscles, which is what he's doing there, accompanied by mentally guided, slow, alternating releases. So how he's kind of opening up very slowly enhances the clarity of moment visualization. So what's happening is he's doing it really slowly. He's doing a lot of things here. He's not only working on his balance, but he's also doing it incredibly slowly, and he's visualizing what it must feel like to actually throw the thing. It's actually quite advanced training, really. Inca arm, left arm. Okay, so what's really interesting is they're talking about symmetric execution of the right side support and the left arm movement, which is really interesting. So they're not talking so much about a differentiation between lower and upper body. They're just talking about how the right arm supported here and the left arm executes at the same time. I mean, this is all very specific shot put stuff. But I mean, if you took this away, and this was for any other event, what they're essentially saying is they spend a long time doing very, I want to say basic, but this is clearly quite an advanced drill. But it's this very low level stuff that requires high concentration and it's very balance orientated. I think that's the main message here. So there's quite specific shot put stuff going on here. But what's going on is the feet are doing a lot of stabilized balance work, whereas the upper body is allowed to move in such a way that's supported by that lower body constantly working on balance. So they're using a barbell now. So the barbell apparently is being used for overall body tension. That's what they're saying. And it's enabling a comprehensive orientation and differentiation. So now they're talking about differentiation between upper body and lower body, while also stabilizing balance. So this is quite a complex movement. You're doing quite a lot of things. You're working on the balance, and they're also looking really about the movement and rhythm of the lower body and upper body. So there's quite a lot of stuff going on here. And so medicine ball work next. So the standing throwing medicine balls emphasize a dynamic movement pattern. So once they've done it slowly, they're starting to. So this is a training progression. You've essentially gone from like really light weights with the small little dumbbell, and then you've moved on to a barbell, and now you're moving on to explosive. And really, you've kind of they've done a mini of their breakdown. They've started extensively, then they've gone intensively, and then now explosively with the medicine ball. They're throwing it against the wall. So that's interesting. They're saying the challenging the quote they literally said there. If I go back. Right. So what they said was the challenging balance positions encourages optimal power transfer. So according to these guys, they're saying that you can't transfer power unless you're in a balanced position. And having to force the balance being like this, they know they're transferring optimal balance. It's debatable. Well, it's working for this guy. I think it's true in a sense that you do need to have a good sense of balance in order to transfer power. I mean, you're not going to, I mean, the converse is definitely true. If you're not balanced, you're not going to be able to transfer power. I don't know whether you need to do it to this extreme, but maybe this was the secret sauce that helped him become a world champion 3 times. To me, this is definitely possibly a winter season. And so, for sure, from what they're talking about with their mesocycles and microcycles, then yeah, if you're doing this way before a competition, this seems appropriate to me. It does, and this is just for shot put. You could do various other things, not necessarily for shot. You could do it for long jump. You could do it for high jump. You just have to be a bit creative. Ah, okay. That last bit. So what they're saying now is after establishing the basic structure, the goal is now to learn how to shape the rhythmic sequence of movements. So they've got the so their first step was they're getting the structure, like what are the movements. And then the quote at the end I actually thought was really nice. It means rhythm is the personality of technique. Okay, so rhythm of the actual movements actually brings the technique alive. So you can do it in slow motion as much as you want, but the actual rhythm of doing the technique gives it its personality. I think that's possibly when I was translating this earlier today, I thought, wow, that's definitely a new way of looking at it. Not a new way, but like I'd never thought of it that way. I mean, obviously, it makes sense to me. So yeah, key quote for me: rhythm is the personality of technique. You can do the technique as slow as you want, as fast as you want, but if it's not coordinated in a rhythmic way, it's not going to work. It's not going to come alive. And I think that kind of there's a bit of paradox here between what Bondarchuk was saying about the energy systems being used and technique. And so so on the hierarchy, if you're replicating the movement but you're not using the energy systems, it's automatically GPE, general preparatory exercise. In order to even go above GPE, you need to be working the energy systems. Bondarchuk's exercise classification hierarchy, the next one up from GPE, which is specific preparatory exercises, you need to work the energy systems. And then above that, you start mimicking the movement more, and then it becomes specific development exercises, SDE. Then it becomes competitive exercise, and then it becomes the event itself. So Bondarchuk seems to rank the energy systems more, and then the technique, the mimicking bit, is at the very top. Whereas here, it's almost not. It's almost like you need to get the technical mastery first, even if it's slow. And they're more interested in balance. And then once that balance there, they now start talking about introducing rhythm and saying that rhythm is the personality of technique. So yeah, very interesting. I still think the debate of energy systems versus technique. To counter that, there's quite a lot of evidence to suggest that if you do hurdling slowly, that doesn't necessarily help with hurdling going quickly. I've read a few articles where that's the case. That's easily found on Google to contrast what this is saying. Also, with a pinch of salt, this video was made 94, was it 95? Sports science has moved on since then. But then, having said that, Bondarchuk, he wrote. I mean, he was a coach in the 70s and 80s, and although he wrote his volumes of sport in the 2000s, I want to say, he must have been thinking about these ideas in the 70s and 80s. It's a tough one. Which one came first? Is this a revision of the other one? Is Bondarchuk the revision of this? Is this a revision of Bondarchuk? You'd have to speak to the athletes. So the same movement rhythm can be expressed in different spatial executions. So Werner's doing the same movement, but he's doing twists, he's doing like runs into it, various different things, and essentially doing different execution variations at various tempos. So he's doing the same movement, but he's now mixing up the variations of tempo. So now he is dictating what the tempos are, and he's completely in control of it. Some coaches might say, no, I want the tempo done only in a specific way. But it's really interesting how in the off season, Werner appears to play around with the tempos. It's almost like he is in control of the tempo because he is changing between tempos so often in a very deliberate way. And so a stable core, flexible form is the motto. So stable core, flexible form. is the motto they're talking about, specifically is a variation on the same theme. So all of these have a very stable core, but flexible. Oh, advert. Yeah. So they also talked about, what did they say? I've lost it. 447. So it's variation on the same thing. Okay, so they're talking about mastering imbalanced movements, so all these different variations, and the precise positioning of the ball against the wall. So they're actually interested where the ball goes is a sign of a controlled and skilled technique. So the fact that all these movements are all imbalanced, they're all over the place, but he's controlling the rhythm, the tempo of the movement, and he's consistently hitting the same point on the wall is essentially saying that this is a demonstration of good technique. So he's doing weird backward shuffles. He did like a little spin. Here you go. Yeah, so good. Watch this all day. He's just hitting the same place on the wall, even backwards. Well, when I say backwards, it's a left-handed throw. So he span looking down from the top clockwise to do a left-handed throw, and looking down from above him anti-clockwise to a right-handed throw. So he demonstrated both ways. So yeah, the principle of balance is the guiding thread, even in strength training, and that just says balance, a principle of strength training. So this is saying always strengthen the agonist and antagonist muscles. So agonist that's doing the work, antagonist that's resisting the motion. So for shot put, the agonist would be the tricep, antagonist would be the bicep. There's no strengthening without stretching. So even these shot putters have to be incredibly flexible and mobile. So they firmly believe you can't be strong without stretching. Actually saying fatigued muscles actually stretch better. Fatigued muscles. And so they and you'll see in a second when he does some weights, he'll actually do a couple of sets of stuff, and then deliberately when going from I can't remember if it's like plyometric, isometric, static, dynamic stuff, because he doesn't just do, you'll see in a second, he doesn't just do weights one way. There's various different muscle contractions, and depending where he is, he'll actually do various different stretches. It's actually quite interesting. And really, he doesn't actually do that many different exercises. I think you actually see he does really bench press and squats, but the variations of those like that get worked, it's quite impressive. And then that says the antagonists serve to optimize the strengthening of agonistics, the agonist muscles. So training the biceps, they're saying, the antagonist, the whole point of doing that is to help strengthen the triceps. I think this is to kind of stop muscle imbalances. I think also the idea of if you push too hard with your tricep, you're going to force your bicep open, and it essentially it contracts eccentrically. It lengthens and it's still contracting. The muscle contracts, but it lengthens. So concentric contraction is where the muscle gets shorter as it contracts. Isometric, it stays the same, and eccentric is where it lengthens. So if I was to push my arm out, the tricep is concentric, it's getting shorter. The bicep is lengthening. So I've gone from tiny to long. And so muscle groups work in pairs. And so rather sensibly, they're going to train both muscle groups in order to get an optimum result. So using the examples of base exercises. So talking about basic exercises, squat and bench press as examples. They're going to demonstrate the methodical implementation of these training principles. So they're going to start with the squat exercise. And then they're going to work on bench press. So they also do supplementary exercises performed before or after fatiguing movements, and they're saying that can efficiently support the main exercises. So not only are they doing variations, they're doing like supersets of stuff. Well, not supersets. They're kind of doing supplementary like bits inside. Yeah, it's just impressive. Like it does make you wonder if they're on some performance enhancing drugs, but I mean, there's nothing wrong with making your athletes do this in an appropriate way at far lower intensities, if that makes sense. Like I'm not going to make someone who's completely new to it back squat 175 kilos for the insane reps this person's doing. But for a conditioning exercise, you could build up to something like this. I mean, Werner Gunthor is Werner Gunthor because he can do this kind of stuff. But essentially, this is the kind of training that a world-class shot putter was doing. And I would expect a similar kind of training from someone that's explosive as him. So supplementary exercises. There's Jean-Pierre Egger, a Swiss athlete. Funky music. So they're talking about stretching the hip flexors, the quadriceps, before moving on to supplementary exercises that will aid the squat. And then the same kind of stuff is applied to strengthening and stretch the arm for shoulder muscles as well. Yeah. Yeah. So they're saying the muscles are loaded up to their local exhaustion with 2 to 6 sets of 10 repetitions per exercise, which is pretty insane. 2 to 6 sets, that's quite a range of 10. And they're essentially saying they're going to apply the same principles to bench press, really. So supplementary stuff. Just insane. More stretching mid-workout. A lot of static stretches I'm noticing, not very many dynamic ones. Yeah. And then doing a compound back and bicep exercise because why not? Absolutely insane. So during the extensive training phase, general muscle building contributes to the harmonious overall development of forces acting on the passive musculoskeletal system. sort of that mean? Essentially, they're just building muscle because not only is it going to help the event, but it also helps just his structure, just his musculoskeletal system is essentially just his all the muscles that help with his structure, standing up properly, walking, doing all the basic stuff. In a nice-ish kind of roundabout way, it's just stuff to stop him being a big bodybuilder that can't really do much and constantly has back problems. The overall athlete. So yeah. Brilliant. Yeah, just absolutely crazy. So in addition to these exercises, other movement functions can be fully incorporated. So essentially, he's doing these exercises for fun. It seems just to be general volume training by the sounds of it. No talk about specificity, anything like that. Just seem to be doing weights for the giggles. General athlete building stuff. I'm doing quite a range of stuff as well. So we're still in the extensive phase. So this is kind of like a general preparation period. Apart from the balance work with shot put and the shot put variations. Now this is impressive. So with variation, a sports school or a sports organization can promote the optimal development of dynamic movement qualities. So clearly here's him just bounding mid-flight on a plyometric mat. All 120, 130 kilograms of him, 6'7". So the goal is to achieve the complete and possible refinement of movement coordination. So they're really, really interested in movement coordination, which I guess is another way of saying tempo. And that's expressed in dynamic balance. So being able to hold your balance in the various prophylactic injury prevention. So yeah, this is just saying he's doing it on a soft surface, just for injury prevention. It's preparing his feet and legs for heavier loads later on in the intensive set, which is about to happen. So yeah, he's doing various barefoot jump holds. You might attribute this with a triple jumper. You know, very impressive frog jumps. He's kind of doing them for speed and distance rather than for height. So specific shaft training. So specific training, strength-specific training is crucial for technique training later on. So you can see him essentially doing glides and standing throw stuff with a barbell on his back, which is 20 kilos, which is not an easy thing to do. So classical repetitions of technique training, specifically supplemented with exercises that optimize rhythmic alternations of tension and relaxation, i.e. going from really relaxed to tensed fairly quickly, backwards and forwards. And this, in this case, is done with a barbell. So relaxed and then building the tension. Lots of variation. You want specific strength. So heavier and lighter balls is a good variation as well. And good experiences on the learning spectrum between 10 and 15% of competition weight. That's interesting. So they found a really good learning experience of only using 10 to 15% of the weight. So 10% of 7.26 kilos is 720 grams. 15, so probably throwing 700 to 1 kilogram balls for speed, bit of resistance and speed, and they're just saying it's a good learning experience. It shows you what happens when your technique is going a bit too fast, maybe. So they're saying just like a pole vaulter needs to direct all their force into the pole, a shot putter needs to direct all their strength into the left side of their body frame to get a significant block. And by doing so, the shot putter is able to unleash their power potential and achieve explosive force. That's all that's saying. So in the same way pole vaulters push onto the pole, they're saying the left-hand side, that strong left leg brace, is what essentially allows the shot putters to work. This is interesting because this is before the era of a good reverse. And so Eastern Europeans were hardcore on the brace. I think, but for me, I mean, this guy's throwing 22 meters with a fixed foot, which is just insane. I think for young throwers, teaching them a fixed foot isn't necessarily a bad thing. Teaches them stability, gets their left leg a bit stronger. I think if you go to the reverse straight away, some athletes that are not strong enough for it, you can't really tell other than they fall out the front of the circle all the time. And you can't tell if that's like a skill issue or whether their left leg is weak. It could be both. But yeah. So they're talking about different types of muscle contraction here. And so in this training phase, the finely tuned alternation between different types of muscle contraction is important. So the intensive phase is all about different types of muscle contractions. So all this stuff on here, you can kind of tell concentric is concentric, eccentric is eccentric, and isometric is isometric. And essentially they're saying in the field of classical technique work or classical training, it's always concentric, eccentric, and isometric, the different types of muscle contractions. However, in the strength training, you're talking about hybrid forms. And so we're looking at plyometric contractions and then the different type of static dynamic elements that link them all together. And so, you know, you've got static dynamic where you've gone from an isometric to a concentric one where you kind of, where I guess that would be a case of if I was doing a bent over row, it'd be isometric because I'd be tensed, I'd hold it for a second and then bang, pull it in. And then, you know, static dynamic going from an eccentric to an isometric maybe is you kind of pulled it in. So you're doing the row. You could do one exercise where you're there, you pull it up, and then you're holding it there isometrically. Well, it's you know, concentrically contracted. Concentrically contracted. And so essentially they're playing around with muscle contractions, and they're getting quite robust muscles. Clearly, I think by doing this, you're actually coaching the athlete to be in full control of how your muscles contract. So it's not just a case of, you know, you're doing this as a party trick. It's like every muscle in your body is firing in various different ways explosively. And I think rhythm is the overarching thing here, and how your muscles contract, the rhythm at which they contract is leading to total mastery here. So what they're saying is they're using pneumatic systems just so they can selectively vary the weight. So the weight is different depending where you are, high or low, during the squat, which is just insane. I can't believe they had this kind of equipment in the 80s, but clearly they did. So yeah, they're talking about greater loads happening during the concentric contraction. So heavier loads on the way down. So jump squats here, so this is the reverse, so it's harder on the way up. So they're talking about static dynamic stuff afterwards. And when combined with isometric work, that so I think what they said before was that the angles at which the knees was supposed to mirror the competition. Yeah. Wettkampf is competition. So yeah, they talked about isometric and plyometric here. So they're holding it and then jump. So isometric, then plyometric, isometric, plyometric, or plyometric, isometric. Yeah. So eccentric to concentric bench press. They're doing the same thing here with bench. Talking about rest periods of at least 5 minutes between all training forms. So they're doing the isometric stuff. And then the static dynamic stuff. So he's holding it, static, and then dynamic push up. Just insane. I struggle to push it up at 100 kg. He's just toying with it. It's just disgusting. But yeah, what an athlete. Versatile, goal orientated strength training. Right. So what they said was the crucial aspect of versatile, goal orientated strength training in any athletic sport is to transform the acquired general strength that we did in the extensive bit into discipline specific explosive power. So the whole point of now this versatile strength training, so they've gone from extensive general stuff to now this versatile, is to now convert all of that general stuff into a specific goal explosive stuff. Plays a central role for coordination and is a valuable training for young athletes. So he did a bit of static stuff. Now he's just going to bound up these stairs like they're 2 foot tall. So the performance determined quality of versatile goal orientated goals. So on one hand, so performance determined quality of the goal orientated strength training is, and specifically strength and explosive power is pursued on two hands. On the one hand, they're talking about criteria guided alternation of different muscle contractions. So on the one hand, you've got these different muscle contractions you're trying to balance, and then on the other hand, they talk about discipline specific rhythmic use of force. Yeah. With relevant impulse directions. So here they're talking about, well, that's horizontal impulse. So yeah, so to recap, the whole point of this module is muscle contractions linked up with specific rhythmic actions. So rhythm and proper muscle contractions forming the correct impulses in the correct way, which is an interesting way of looking at it. It's just insane. It's hardly bending his knees and he's getting like a foot off the ground. Lateral impulse to the side as opposed to horizontal forward. Just insane. Vertical impulse. This is probably the most impressive. For the record, this guy had a high jump PB of 207 while being 130 kilograms. 207. Something crazy. Propulsion and pussy. So it's just propulsion and pushing. So we've done the extensive phase, the intensive phase. So we'll not skip the explosive, but a lot of it is, because I've just realized we're running into the hour mark, but a lot of it is him warm weather training and doing various amounts of explosive stuff. And if I was to boil it down into a nutshell, it's highly technical stuff. They get the video camera out, the 1980s video camera. They're talking about technique. All of the stuff that you'd expect to see in shot putting. Variations. So we're now in French. So it's now specific. You've got to have extreme conditioning to do this because the intensity goes up. So they're just doing a bit of pre-mesocycle conditioning, which I wouldn't have thought they needed, but I think because, as they talked about before, the last microcycle of each mesocycle was tapered down. Maybe this is to get back into it and build. So, yeah, so by looking at a video camera, the coach can train the athlete and perfect the final forms of the throw. It's talking about blocking the left-hand side. Strong left arm and block. Getting more of the push. Having a right strong support, blocking the left-hand side. I'm paraphrasing, but plenty of height, pushing from behind. So yeah, this block is all about developing coordination and maximal force, and that comes from having a strong muscular skeletal system, which develops in the previous phases. So just having a strong muscular skeletal system drives this period, I think. Shot put. So 3 to 5 reps maximal for shot put training in this weight session, contrasted with 2 to 6 sets of 10 in the intensive phase. So the repetitions have dropped right down, but this is now more maximal. So yeah, looking a bit more angry, a bit leaner. Just insane. I forgot what he said, but you need to concentrate specifically on technique and extraordinary things will happen. So sometimes to help with your muscular program, it's important to do regeneration exercises. I'm not quite sure how 100 plus kilograms cleans is regenerative, but must be for them. Yeah, so this is just more heavy lifting. Yeah, impressive. Heavy lifting. This is them having fun in the sun, warm weather. So to help generate maximal force, they do alternations of exercise throwing that they're doing. So forward throws, backward throws, all maximal force, explosive. So they're developing a competitive atmosphere, measuring stuff, competing against each other. 7 standing long jumps in a row. Horrible technique, but bloody hell, motoring. Quick ground contact times against the clock. Variations on a theme. Very impressive. This is what struck me. You would not expect a 6'7", 120-kilogram person to hurdle this well. 3 strides, 1 stride hurdles, then 7 or 8 strides, and then back into 3 strides. It's just very weird looking at someone that muscular hurdle. They look very stiff. And so, yeah, just having a swim, bit of pleasure, doing it for fun. You know, essentially, they're saying they do all these kind of exercises for fun in their downtime. Bit of tennis. Again, just really weird seeing this muscle-bound person. But yeah, just insane. And then it's the competition season. I think, yeah, this is where the truth comes out and all the planning comes to fruition. World record at the time, how to prepare for it. Just very interesting, the equipment they used. Very old VCR, and if you want freeze frame, they've got like this printer. So they're constantly breaking down technique between competitions. And it just makes you really think. These guys were so muscular that even athletes now have access to far better feedback in terms of technique just by filming things on their phones. And so when you look back, especially early on when he was throwing it, let's say back here, oh geez, what have I done? You might go, oh well, this technically wasn't that great. Some might argue it wasn't. And he was just a big strong boy. And you think, like, probably didn't have that many opportunities to see himself throw. And the feedback was him interpreting his coach's directions and occasionally having the feedback from video cameras. I think he did incredibly well, actually. Whereas I think kids these days, they could just see it on their phone straight away. They're essentially doing it in stages. And this is just a montage of him doing all these different things. So, yeah, I think it worked out. Yeah, winning a world champs. I think that's Randy Barnes down there. Could be Randy Barnes, looks like him. So if I go back to over here and I go to Werner Gunthor, I think actually his top 10, if I go to result, no, so personal, progression, no, honours, no, results. I can't remember where it was, but you had, there you go, his top 10 results. 10 throws, all over 22 meters 16. It's just insane. Like having an average of about 22 meters 20. Some of these at major champs, world champs, Europeans. Maglingen is where the federation, the Swiss Federation Sportschule is. That must have been a national champs or something. Broke the national record twice. By the looks of it, still has it. Yeah, just insane. But yeah, Werner Gunthor. A lot of good stuff with his strength and conditioning. You could argue, oh, well, it's only shot putters. But I think this idea of extensive, intensive, and explosive, I think this idea of looking at it from a different angle and looking at muscle contractions and rhythm, those two things when they come together, or rather having lots of different stimulus with muscle contractions. So being able to do it isometrically, holding it, eccentrically, concentrically, plyometrically, going from static, dynamic, various different ways. And then rhythm work with that underlining work on balance. I think it's just incredibly important. And for me personally, my athletes are too young for this kind of stuff. This is quite intense training. There's definitely elements I'll probably be incorporating, but nowhere near to this level. I probably wouldn't start looking at this kind of stuff until they were under 20s, seasoned international athletes, that kind of stuff. And I can kind of see what I'm doing right now is building towards that. So I'm building up their energy systems. I'm getting technically efficient in the events. The rhythms might not be there, but I think that's for them to kind of figure out as they're growing up. And yes, it's important. I agree. And I think the rhythm will just happen naturally. But at the moment, I just want them to be technically efficient, good athletes. I think hardcore rhythm and tempo training requires quite a lot of, as they said, balance, high intensity, prolonged work, doing various different muscle contraction work. My athletes, I'm going to make a judgment call, and I don't think they're there now. But I can very easily see them doing something like this in the not too distant future. Yeah, very interesting. Could you apply this to jumping? Yes, absolutely. Could you apply this to sprinting? Yeah, absolutely. Now, they're talking about muscle contraction work. Now, the shot putter here, Werner Gunthor, has kind of gone down the road of weights. It looks like weights with some plyometric-y type stuff, ordinarily. But who's to say a combined eventer might not say, well, actually, I'm going to do muscle contraction work, but it's going to involve hurdling, sprinting, jumping, and a tiny bit of weights. You can just change the menu of activities, but the same underlying principles of having an extensive phase could coincide with a winter session, with a winter training program. That's probably what I suspect is going on here, especially European countries where the winter is cold and you probably have to go inside and can't go outside and do stuff. Yeah, they probably have an extensive session, and then intensive is where it's transitioning across. And balance, well, extensive seems to me, if we go back, it was lots of this balance work, playing around with tempo, balanced tempo, and then this idea of strengthening and stretching all of the muscles, not necessarily with ideas of muscle contractions, but more with this underlying sense of getting everything balanced. So having an agonist, antagonist muscles working, essentially loading up your musculoskeletal system ready for the intensive phase. And so here was the beginning of the intensive phase, and you started seeing all these variations of things. Yeah, here it was. And so now in the intensive phase, they're talking about the art of different muscle contractions. So there you go, concentric, eccentric, isometric. And talking about plyometric, static, dynamic, that kind of thing. And so you've got various equipment. I don't think you need a pneumatic squat device, but I'm sure you can be inventive and do various other things, playing around with different exercises. There's nothing stopping you using medicine balls for younger athletes doing this kind of stuff. Do you really need to do 150 kilo bench press hold when you could have a 6 kilo medicine ball and then throw, kind of thing? You could tailor this to athletes of different, it just depends. Does it have to be bench press? Could you do this with some kind of like squat, for example? You're holding a low squat and you suddenly power out of it, with a medicine ball on your back. There's so many different ways. You just have to be creative about it. And I think as long as you're kind of, at this point, you're trying to be dynamic, the muscles are contracting in various different ways. What I feel is you're generating impulse. It's that the rhythm and the general musculature has been made in the extensive, and you're now getting that rhythm linked up with the right muscle contractions and developing impulse. And then this explosive bit is, a little bit of whereas a little bit of conditioning, I think, just to stay fit. I think that's more of a fitness thing rather than whatever. And then it looks like it's technique, 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 and it's all technique at high explosivity. They don't do slow stuff. They're banging out the shot puts, they're banging out the weights, they're doing far less reps, but everything is being banged out. They're playing games, but they're explosive games. You know, they're doing various hurdle stuff as like general mobility work and explosivity, and then it's the season.